Hello, everybody. All right. Had a little bit of a sabbatical here, but I'm back again, and we're going to talk about some more music. So, if you're my age, and maybe younger and maybe older, I feel like everybody knows what I just played. That was Brain Stew by Green Day. I never would have thought I'd make a lesson about a Green Day song, but here we are. I love this song growing up. This is one of the first songs I ever learned on guitar. I'm not just going to teach you how to play the song. If you're watching these lessons, you probably can make your way through Brain Stew pretty okay. But if you can't, maybe the least you get out of this is you learn how to play the riff to this tune, which is a really great riff. And I remember learning it in one of my first guitar lessons and thinking, because it's all these power chords, A, G, F sharp, F, and E. And I remember thinking how impossible it would be to get from this chord back to the first chord again way up here. I just thought that was just traveling halfway around the world to me. It seemed impossible. Just, goes to show, like, the littlest thing is just so challenging when you first start playing an instrument, But I'm not really going to talk about how to play the song so much as I'm going to do another thing in a series that I've been doing here where I pick pretty sort of accessible, popular rock songs that are easily stuck in most of our heads as a vehicle to get better at playing over changes, which is a huge vocabulary of what is popularly sort of, or, usually something that is thought of as sort of like a jazz-based skill set. Being able to play over individual chords in a series where it requires you playing notes that are specific to each chord as they come, and the next chord a bar later might require a totally different set of notes to handle than the first one. So I love that stuff, and I've had a bit of jazz training. I don't consider myself a jazz guitarist, really, so much as a rock one with jazz training. So to me, the best way that I learned how to do that stuff was to take songs that were stuck in my head, songs that I grew up with, that had interesting chords in them that I could think like that with. And you can, by all means, you can shut your brain off and just sort of like use one scale for this stuff too, and it sounds awesome. But if you choose, you can get a little more detailed than that. And I think that's important when you're learning how to do this stuff, how to play over chord changes and think the way that I just talked about. For people my age, like a sort of younger generation, we don't have Giant Steps or Donna Lee by Charlie Parker stuck in our heads. Maybe some of us do if our parents brought us up with that, but by default, probably not. So I think it's important to have stuff that you grew up with that's really in your DNA and use that to get better at certain things, at least at first, and then open up your mind to other songs and other styles of music that you can sort of train yourself to where that becomes as catchy as a pop song or something on the radio. And this is one of those things to me. So let's talk about how to improvise with it. First off, the chords, like I said, are A, and they're just power chords. There's no thirds or anything in the chord. It's just the root and the fifth of the chord. So there's no mood under any chord. You can't tell me just based on the chord alone if this is A major or A minor. There's nothing in there to tell you what it is. It's just the root and the fifth. There's no third to tell you if it's major or minor. Same with every other chord. A, then a G power chord, an F sharp power chord, F, and E. Okay? So those chords by themselves don't tell you much. And when you look at them on your own, as an improviser, probably the simplest thing to do is that you could either solo in A minor, or if you want a major sound, you would solo in the relative minor. So you're in A major, thinking in A major, and solo in F sharp minor, because that has all the same notes as A major. Which, if you look at the melody, and this is something people forget to do a lot, even though the chords don't say that much about the mood of the song, the melody does. Because even though this A chord is just a root and a fifth, the melody that he sings over it is major. So you're in A major. Or maybe starts on A, I don't know which. The melody has C sharp notes all over it. So between the chords and the melody combined, you're in A major. That C sharp note is the third of A. It's the major third. Okay? So as sort of a default, just thinking of the melody as your sort of first jumping off point, I would stick to mostly A major lines in this one. So probably A major pentatonic. I wouldn't really have a G sharp. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily think of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. The reason I wouldn't think of that T being in there, G sharp, is because the next chord after the A is G major. And you definitely don't want to play a G chord with a G sharp in it at the same time, at least not in this situation. Okay? That to me would actually imply mixolydian. So between those two chords, I would play a G natural note in my ideas, right? So that would be the first thing to think about. Over those two chords, I would use either A major pentatonic or A mixolydian if you want to get a little more specific. So maybe I could even make a loop with just those two chords as an example first. So it's sort of, you know, that one little compartment of the chord progression. Here's A major pentatonic. Sounds like the melody. It's the same content that makes up the melody. But since the second chord is G, feel free to use G notes in your ideas. It sounds a little more specific, I guess. Sounds more jam bandy to me. Pretty cool. So after this chord is when something interesting happens to me. Because after this G chord comes an F sharp power chord. So just F sharp and its fifth, which is C sharp. This is where I feel like something kind of neat happens that I can take advantage of. Because what's happening in the melody there? Okay, so the melody is playing an A note. So between that F sharp and that C sharp and the A, you actually get an F sharp minor chord, right? Between the vocal melody and then the two notes in the guitar, That makes up a whole minor chord. So I would probably want to play an F sharp minor over that. Right? Sounds appropriate, right? But I think to my ear, just based on other songs that have similar chords to this, what my ear sort of actually expects that chord to be, whether I even like kind of consciously am aware of it or not, is actually a D major chord, but with F sharp in the bass. Now that's kind of not what it is, but I want it to be so bad. And the cool thing is that, again, because these chords are so ambiguous and there's not a lot of detail in them, there's no melody when if you were to take this and solo over it, the melody probably wouldn't be happening at the same time. So there's nothing telling you you can't treat it as a D major with an F sharp in the bass, right? So basically D major, but with the third of that D major in the bass. That could be another option for your improvising. So you could, on one hand, you could treat that chord as F sharp minor. You could solo it over as if it's that. You could also treat it as if it's D major over F sharp. Here's what that sounds like if I include, kind of broaden those chords into full chords. That's D over F sharp. Now here's where it's F sharp minor. This sounds a little more like what between the melody and the chords, what it actually is. Right? But as an improviser, it's vague enough that you could take it down either path that you want. And they both sort of have the same genetic makeup anyways, so you're not ever playing any wrong, and you're not ever necessarily playing any notes that are different from the ones you would use for the other chord that you're implying. They both offer the same notes, but you just might land on ones at different times depending on what your brain is treating it as. Now the other more far out one is I like to treat that F sharp as an F sharp major too. You gotta be more careful with it, but I like the sound of it. So you could kind of imagine that it's this. That's a cool sound. So when you do that, that's kind of neat because every chord in the passage ends up being majors. So you could even take the same sort of motif for each chord and just move it appropriately to where the chord is. So you could go... That's kind of neat. You just move the same passage down according to what chord is happening when and where, you know? Then, lastly, here's where you really have to be a little careful, is because everything up until this point, these three chords, you could safely be in either A Mixolydian or solo in the relative F sharp minor, and every note would sound golden over it. But when you get to this chord, F major, or that's just an F power chord, but I for sure, even if there were a third there, I'm guaranteed would be A natural. Over that, you basically have to play F natural notes. You can't play F sharp notes anymore because that F sharp note just does... In my opinion, it does not coexist with that F major chord whatsoever. So on one hand, if you want to be simple about it, you just have to tell yourself, okay, well, I can solo in A Mixolydian or A major pentatonic, but when it gets to this F chord, I can't play F sharp notes while that chord is happening. You can, I'm not going to tell you not to, but I personally would avoid that note. Then when you get to E, this offers something cool too, because all of a sudden, even though I've been saying to use A Mixolydian if you're going to get a little more specific over this whole thing, because it goes to a G chord. This is the second chord, right? It has a G natural in it. But this E chord, in my imagination, I want there to be a G sharp note in there. So when I get to this chord, I want to play some G sharp notes if I can. It's only there for a very brief amount of time, so you don't have to at all. But if it's convenient to do so, that's a note I like to take advantage of. So I'm going to solo a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about a little more specific of a way to treat this, okay? So I'm going to make another loop here. So over these first three chords, I'm going to solo in F sharp minor pentatonic. I could leave space there if I want to. But when it gets to that F chord and that E chord, I'm going to take advantage of what they offer. That's the other thing I forgot to mention, is that when you get to the F chord, that F chord has a C natural note in it too. Now remember, the melody has a C sharp over most of it, but over that F chord, you can play a C natural if you want too. Now let's play around a little more. I'm going to treat, when it gets to that F sharp, I'm going to treat it as a D chord. Like as if it's a D chord, but F sharp is the third of that chord. I like the F, thinking of as F sharp minor a little more. Cool. Now, if you have some arpeggio knowledge, that's a great way to handle this too, is because if you can arpeggiate all the chords, then you can map out the entire thing for yourself. A major, G major, F sharp minor, F major, E major. Maybe you don't have some of that vocabulary yet, but I urge you to get it, right? And I have a bunch of lessons about arpeggios already. So if you want to dig down into prior lessons and find some arpeggio lessons, that's an immensely powerful tool to get, unlock some things out of chord progressions like this that maybe you wouldn't if you were just soloing in minor pentatonic or something. And I can't stress enough that it's totally okay if all you do is utilize like playing, F sharp minor pentatonic or A major pentatonic over this. In fact, you'll probably play something that will mean more to most people. But I get restless and I like kind of like unlocking other things that maybe like I like taking a seemingly simple progression like this and finding out that there's more than meets the eye. It's just the dorkiness of my brain working. So lastly, what I like to do to sort of the most sort of like, I don't know, the strategy that has the most content in it for you to take advantage of is to each chord in the progression, I like to apply a scale to go with it, right? So, really for the first 3 chords, I don't have to do much thinking at all. I would think of all 3 of them as either A major pentatonic, which I would actually just use F sharp minor pentatonic because it's the same notes and it's easier for our hands to use. Over the F chord, and the E chord. I mean, you don't have a lot of time to think about it, I guess, but if you have the time to think this quickly, the right scale that would go with that F chord would be F Lydian. So, over the first 3 chords, I would use A mixed Lydian. So, okay? When it gets to the F, I would use F Lydian. Here we go. Sounds pretty good. I think kind of now that I'm actually in it, when you get to the last 2 chords of it, I don't think there's enough time to treat it as something that you would apply an entire scale to. I think it moves by too fast. So even though it's coming from a place of F Lydian or whatever, I wouldn't think of it like that. I would probably think of it that in that time span when there's an F chord, I want to take advantage of F notes and C natural notes. And in that quick time span where there's an E chord, I can play G natural notes that'll still sound okay, but I want to take advantage of G sharp notes sometimes too, right? Then when you put it all together, let me make a new loop here. When you put it all together, you get... Right? So, to summarize, you can disregard all of this shit if you want to. You can just, like, if you were soloing over these chords, you could absolutely just think like a rock player. You're an A, go to town. But if you want to maybe, like, get a little more, I don't know, specific about things, if you feel like your brain is working in a way where you want to see what's under the hood a little more, or imagine things that aren't actually there for the sake of having new melodies that maybe nobody else would usually think to play over this might be a good vehicle for that. Anyways, just have fun with it above all, and I'll see you guys real soon. Hope you're having a good day. Bye-bye.